Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring honest conversation about what it means to be a woman, a mother, and in business. I'm your host, Farrah Haidar. Today, we will be discussing life design, and joining me is Shana Francesca. Shana is a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur. She helps people live more joyful and connected lives through the principles of life design. Shana believes our present and future are transformed when we infuse our lives with intention. We design our lives and realize the power in accepting ourselves as the author of our story. Okay, Shana, I'm going to redo that because I made like four
Go for it.
errors.
Go for it.
And
I understand. Go for it.
yeah, okay. So 10:35, first edit. All right. Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring honest conversation about what it means to be a woman, a mother, and in business. I'm your host, Farrah Haidar. Today, we will be discussing life design, and joining me is Shana Francesca. Shana is a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur. She helps people live more joyful and connected lives through the principles of life design. Shana believes our present and future are transformed when we infuse ourselves with intention, we design our lives, and realize the power in accepting ourselves as the author of our own story. So, Shana, the reason I was really excited to interview you is because I truly believe in intentional living. I think that
Yeah.
life can get away from you.
Yes.
And if we don't actively choose what we do, someone else will. And that usually does not end well for anybody involved.
No.
So, why don't we start at the beginning? Tell me, in your words, what is life design?
Yeah. First, thanks for having me.
You're
Um,
very welcome.
Life design is really getting clear on the story that we want our life to tell. But even if we take a step back before that, to get clear on the story that we want our life to tell, and then to get intentional about the way that we are living, right? Aligning ourselves with our intention, getting clear on the story that we want our life to tell is kind of the way that we're setting the intention, right? And then creating this, not a script, but like a guidebook, right?
Mhm.
But to even do that, we kind of have to take a step back and go inward. We have to recognize the systems that are set up around us that have been set up to corral us into knowing our place and to falling in line, right? And all that that implies into, fulfilling the roles that society has set forth for us because of the systems that govern our society. And so when we start to recognize that all of those rules have nothing to do with us as individual human beings or us as a collective, right? They are set aside by those who are in power. We can recognize that there is a world of possibilities we don't even know are possible because we have been trained to view the world from a very specific, very narrow lens. And as we begin to get curious about what's possible, we can then start to craft the story that we want our life to tell from a broader lens, from a broader understanding. And then we can get intentional about shedding those things that may never have served us, probably never did, but are definitely not serving us anymore. And we can get intentional about how we live our life.
So, give me some examples. Like, I want that's a very and a very, very interesting way, a very
Yeah,
interesting worldview. So, give me
yeah,
some examples
yeah.
of what you feel like are systems that hold people in place. And when you say people, do you mean just women or do you mean men as well? Like,
I mean, everyone. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. They strip all of us of our humanity in an effort to keep us in line, right? And so for me, raised as a woman,
Mhm.
as a white woman in America, I was it was made very clear to me from the time that I was born, based on the fact that I was like all the marketing that came my way, even from a child, is like a Fisher Price kitchen, doll babies, pink dresses. This is a way of programming
Mhm.
the way that we see the world and the way that we're meant to see the world in order to fulfill a specific role as mother, as homemaker, as caretaker for our family. And this is the narrow view that we're given of what's possible for us. This is what we're meant to desire. This is what's programmed into us as to what we're meant to do and what we're meant for. But that's based on someone else's narrative, right? And that's based on someone else's profit,
Mhm.
right? Someone is profiting from it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so at some point in time, for me, like if I use my own life as an example, at some point in time, I recognized that in fact, I didn't want those things. I didn't
Yeah.
want the path that had been required of me. I didn't want to travel it. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't. I was like the I was the kid who was like, I'll be right back, and like ran through the pricker bushes and like climbed the trees that were along this path, right? I was trying to look for and find something that felt like it was more attached to who I was. And every time I did, I felt myself yanked back onto
Mhm.
this path that was decided for me. Um, but it was so harmful. It was so harmful because it required me to abdicate the most truest, creative, beautiful parts of myself in an effort to fulfill someone else's desires for my life. My life was being required to live for someone else's pleasure and exploitation rather than for my own pleasure, which is what it's actually meant for.
So I would say that you had a very clear example, right? Like
Yeah.
you were definitely not into what was being sold to you. I would say not everyone's like that. Some people, kind of their desires fall in line, and I think they have an
Yeah.
easier time of it that way.
Yeah.
So,
For a long time my life did, even
yeah.
until my mid 20s. I would tell people, yeah, I want to get married, I want to have kids, but it was like me saying like I wanted to hurry up and get it done with so then I could live. I would literally describe it like I'll get married, I'll have like one or two kids, they'll be grown by the time I'm like 45, they'll be like teenagers, and then I can like start living my life. Like that's literally how I would describe it.
Yeah, that's
And at
not.
some point I realized that sounds miserable.
Yeah, it
For
does.
me, not for everyone, but for me it sounded miserable. That's not
Mm,
what I
yeah.
wanted.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think for me, it takes a long time
Yeah,
to because I grew up with a very specific gender roles being taught to me as well.
yeah.
And some of my desires and wants for life fell within that, and that was easy, and the stuff that didn't, there was a huge price to pay for that.
Yes,
Um, for abdicating that
yes,
role, for saying no. And in some ways I'm still learning how to say no. I'm
me
sure
too.
you feel that way too, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Um, so my thing is like, how do you get clear on that, on what is your voice and what isn't?
That's a good question. For me, it has been the practice of
Mhm.
getting quiet and recognizing my own inner voice. Also recognizing my body, right? Because our bodies often are subconsciously reacting to things that we consciously haven't recognized yet.
Yep.
Little things like if I walk into a room and I'm surrounded by a bunch of people maybe I don't know, right?
Mhm.
And I walk up to go grab a drink from the bar or something, and someone approaches me, and immediately I feel my body turn away from them. That's intuition. That's
Yeah.
my body saying you're not safe. And I don't have to justify it and I don't have to explain it and I don't have to have reasons. I'm going to trust my body and I'm going to trust my intuition and I'm going to walk away. Even if that person insists on speaking to me,
Mhm.
I can say, I'm actually not interested, and I can just walk away.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we're
Yeah.
not always safe to do that, right?
No.
As we're not always safe to do that. Um, but in the moments when I can, I'm going to just walk away because if I continue to engage that person, I'm going to get less and less safe, right?
Yes.
Less and less safe is what I have learned. So I've learned to trust my intuition, to find other people in the room that my body does feel safe with. Walk up to another woman, right? Walk up to another person that feels safe to me and gain that safety. For me, it has been learning to trust my intuition and to foster it
Yeah.
because we are so much as women taught not to trust our intuition because the word crazy is dragged out every
Mhm.
time our intuition tells us something and we're like something's not right here and we voice it. We're called crazy,
Mhm.
and it's in an effort to shove down how perceptive we are. It's in an
Mhm.
effort to shove down that inner voice that
Mhm.
so that we stop trusting it and then we stop trusting ourselves. So it becomes a practice of learning to trust it again, letting it speak again, letting it be heard, and knowing that I can trust it.
And even when it's telling you opposite what your logical mind would tell you, which is like your logical mind might say you're not safe, but your body's telling you, no, no, you are. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it goes the opposite way too. I
Right.
really
Right.
love that concept of the body as a truth teller,
Yes.
and I think a lot of people, kinda discount it sometimes, but the fact is that if you look at it from a different, and this is what I always tell people, you look at it from a different perspective, when we talk about, the FBI questioning somebody or something, they're taught to detect body language.
Mhm.
The body does
Micro expressions. Yes.
micro expressions and stuff.
Yes.
Why? Because the body never lies.
Body doesn't lie.
So
No.
so there is, like, for those of you
Yeah.
that are skeptics out there,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is
There's a whole science.
scientific
Mhm.
proof. There's a science behind this that our
Yeah.
body does not lie. And I have to tell you, I think there was only one time in my life that I had literally a visceral reaction to somebody for absolutely no reason. He was introduced to
Mm,
me. I was in a completely
mm.
safe environment, but I had this visceral reaction to this man, and I couldn't explain it. I just and people were like, and this is really hard, especially for young women out there.
Yeah.
It's really hard for a young woman who has this reaction and knows in
Knows.
her gut,
Yeah. Yes.
right? But then she's asked, "Well, why do you think that way?"
You don't owe anyone an explanation, period.
Exactly, and that's one
Period.
thing, it's funny because my husband and I were actually having this discussion because my daughter just said no to something. He's like, "Why did she say no? She shouldn't say no.
Uh-uh.
There's it," and I said,
Yes.
"She said no,
She
and
said
she
no.
doesn't have to
No
justify
is
it."
a full sentence. No
Yeah,
is a full sentence, and it
yeah,
requires no explanation, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but here's the one thing, and I'm gonna tackle this a little bit more because I think it's
Yeah.
important. How do you like, for me, it took a while to get back to that trusting gut
Mm.
intuition,
Yeah, me too.
and especially because I also, deal with some body stuff and stuff like that. So getting back in touch with the body and feeling like I can live in my body was a part of that. But I always have this fear that it's my anxiety talking, or
Mm,
it's something that isn't my true intuition.
mm.
And that's I'm getting better at it, but I'd love
Yeah,
to hear your perspective on how you
yeah.
differentiate between those 2 things.
For me, I do agree that sometimes it can be really hard to know if I'm triggered
Mhm,
intellectually or because I have CPTSD.
mhm,
Um, or if it is my intuition. There were times I'm getting so much better at it. At first, I didn't know the difference, and here's the grace I gave myself.
mhm,
I would rather be trust whatever's happening in my mind or my body for the moment, right? It doesn't mean I don't take a breath, right? It doesn't mean I have to react violently or crazy or get crazy defensive.
sure,
I think that's where I wasn't sure what was acceptable in a way to react, right? And I think
mhm,
that's where my not sure and not, was coming up is like, am I safe? Do I have to run? I could just take a breath and I could cross the street if I felt like I was in an unsafe, like I didn't feel safe with whoever was walking towards me because I would rather cross the street, right?
yeah,
Than stay on the side of the street and suffer whatever consequences. Or I would rather walk away from a conversation where I feel like I'm being denigrated. Say nothing, right? If somebody's being disrespectful, rude, just walk away. Literally just stop speaking or just walk away while the person is talking, right? I,
yeah,
I owe them no explanation. I owe them nothing. Just walk away, then stay in a situation where I felt unsafe because it was more important for me to let myself know that I'm safe with me. I'm
mhm,
safe inside my own body. And as my body and my mind got to recognize that I'm safe and that I could trust my intuition, the fear, it became clearer whether it was intuition or it was a triggered response,
yeah,
right?
mhm,
By getting present, getting inside my body, meditation really helped with that, with helping to calm my nervous system, reprogram my brain, open up new neural pathways because trauma is stored in our bodies. And I truly believe that there's not a person walking on this planet that does not have trauma.
yeah,
Epigenetics tells us that even if we directly have not experienced trauma, if anyone in our direct lineage, meaning our mother, our grandmother, experienced trauma, the egg that created us was inside of our mother's body while she was being formed inside of her grandmother's body.
yeah. It's passed on
It's
Yeah.
so the trauma that was being experienced by your mother while she was being formed, or the trauma that was being experienced by your grandmother while your mother was being formed in your grandmother's womb, you were also exposed to because your egg was inside of her while she was being formed and your grandmother was experiencing that trauma, right?
Yeah.
So that is passed down, and informs our DNA, informs the fact that they were grown inside of a stress hormone filled environment,
Hmm.
et cetera, right? It literally affects our body. So when we get clear and understand that trauma has changed the way our brain operates and the way that our body functions, we can start to understand that it's really all tied together.
Hmm.
Um, and the more we can sit with and be comfortable inside of our own bodies and listen to what's going on, and it's hard,
Hmm.
um, the more that we feel safe inside of our own bodies.
Great. So now we've talked about intuition. You find this,
Yeah,
you're getting more in touch. Let's
yeah,
relate it back to life design,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
how has that informed your life design? How did it bring you
yeah.
getting back in touch with that? How did it bring you to the concept of life design?
Yeah, it helped me to realize once I got quiet and clear with what was actually going on, where I'm safe, where I'm not safe, what belongs in my life, what doesn't belong in my life. And I was able to start shedding the things that weren't serving me in the first place, that I was adhering to certain ideology or certain, programming. Then I could start to get really clear on, okay, is this what I actually want? What is my
Hmm.
intuition telling me? Is this what I actually want, or do I feel like I need to pursue this to fulfill societal expectations?
Yeah.
Right. And it's not like I live my life in a way that specifically challenges societal expectations. I simply do not acknowledge the power. I do not acknowledge the power. Right. A
Yeah.
rule does not have authority over me. It's not me being rebellious. It's simply me not giving it power.
Yeah.
And when we come from a place of recognizing that we're not actually living in a place of rebellion, when we choose to live our life outside of the lines or just decide what the lines look like for ourselves,
Hmm.
um, that we're not being rebellious. We're just living our life. And you start to kind of be like, well, I want to try this thing, and give yourself the grace to try the thing with absolutely no expectation of specific success, right?
Yeah.
We can get curious and we can just explore the world and see what's possible for no specific outcome,
Yeah.
right? For no
Yeah.
specific outcome, just because I want to see what happens. I want to see what experience. I want to just experience something new, and maybe something comes of it. And maybe the only thing that comes of it is a moment of joy, right?
Hmm.
Is this a moment of connection with another human being, a moment of connection with myself and my own creativity? And when we start to be able to reframe life and our experiences, suddenly there's so much more possibility, and curiosity and playfulness become a part of our life again, right? In
Yeah.
the way that they were when we were a child. And so much of that is not meant to leave us. We are meant to bring that with us through life as part of who we are, that playfulness, that curiosity that sparks our joy, right? And
Yeah.
just for the hell of it, right?
Yeah.
um, and so that's when we really begin to design our life, is when we start to really get clear that I'm just meant to enjoy this life, right? And so much of the things that I have to do are because of the way our world is set up, that require I have to survive as well, right?
Hmm.
I have to
Yeah.
figure out how to survive. And that's an important part. And I'm not negating that. That's absolutely important. We have to figure out how to survive. But as we get more in touch with ourselves, and we're able to connect with one another, and we're able to create community, and we're able to create ways to not just survive, but to thrive together and share
Hmm.
resources in ways that usurp the systems that in fact are meant to keep us in line.
I can't tell you how much I relate to that because like I started this podcast. Podcast is completely a project of joy for me.
Yeah,
Like there's
love that.
yeah, it just is. And it came out to be I kind of fell into it. But a lot of people ask me, well, why are you doing that? What's the
Mm,
goal? Where's the ROI? I have an MBA and I own a business. And,
yeah.
so it's very, and I think the world kind of programs you to think that way, that if you invest your time in something, even the word invest, right? If you
Mm-hmm,
spend your time, you're investing your time and
mm-hmm.
therefore you should expect something
An
in
ROI.
return.
Yeah.
and a return on it. And I think spent years, I wouldn't say half-assing, but like half starting projects because
Yeah.
I couldn't justify the ROI. So I'd abandon them even though
Yeah.
my heart was in them.
Yeah.
Um, and I just at some point I kind of started looking at my life and I found that my life was filled. It was no, it was beyond filled. It was
To the brim.
overflowing
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the brim with everything I had to do
Right.
and nothing that I wanted to do.
Yes, exactly.
And I just started looking at it. I said, well, let's take a food concept here. They say, put more veggies on your plate and it'll crowd out the stuff you shouldn't be eating,
Yes.
right?
Yes, exactly.
So let's put more joy on the plate
Yes.
and see what it crowds out. And been
Yes,
a slow shift. And I got to tell you, it's very hard because
it is.
you have to get used to, that question. Well, why are you doing this?
Yeah, the
And that
programming is so
need.
strong. The programming is so strong.
It is. And the need to justify yourself. I
Yes.
think one of the biggest gifts we can give our kids, by the way, is telling them, you don't need to justify yourself.
Mhm.
You don't need to justify having a feeling.
Correct. Yeah.
Now if you misbehave and you behave badly, that's something else. But you can have the feeling, right? You know,
Yeah.
we could. That's a different topic.
That's a different
But
topic. Yeah, that could be
yeah.
a whole topic.
Okay, so talk to me about some principles of life design, right?
Yeah.
So you're obviously putting more joy on the plate, but if someone was just starting and is new to this concept, what's a couple of things you would tell them? Like, where would they start?
I say start with curiosity. And I say
Mhm.
I will probably die on this mountain, although I reserve the right to change my mind and provide no explanation. Um,
Yeah.
um, Curiosity could save the world.
Mm.
Curiosity will save the world.
Mhm.
When we get curious, wrapped up in curiosity is vulnerability, is authenticity, is playfulness, is connection, right? Because when we're curious about something, we're looking to connect with that thing, we're looking to understand it, right?
Mhm.
And as human beings, there's so much that it is pushing us apart from one another, but we have more alike than we do apart, right? Even
Mhm.
with things that are like even other beings that are not specifically human, we have more connection with that. Like for instance, mushrooms. Mushrooms communicate through mycelium, billions of neuropathic connections underneath the ground, every step under the soil, and our internet mirrors mycelium, right? And the way that it communicates, and trees communicate through mycelium, right? Trees
Yeah.
hold stories, trees talk to one another. When we start to understand that the world around us is more a reflection of us than not, we start to recognize the impact that our life has. And we start to get curious about that impact. And we start to understand, holy cow, I am way more powerful than I understood, and not in an egocentric way, but in a way that we start to recognize the way that our power affects everything around us and the ripple effects everything we do has on one another. So curiosity is absolutely the beginning. And the more curious we get, it just builds on one another, and we experience so much joy from curiosity. And from that, I say then listening to your intuition,
Mhm.
and then getting intentional, getting clear on the story that you want your life to tell. Just start getting clear on it. Just
Yeah.
write down the most outlandish things, right? If there was nothing holding you back, nothing stopping you, write that story, right? You can craft it over and over again, and I suggest that you revisit it often, but write that down. And then start to get intentional and look for ways in which you can build your life, because our life is not built on massive decisions. Our life is built on hundreds of decisions, the little minute things every single day. Our choice of how much sleep we're going to get, if we have a choice, because if you have young
Mhm.
children, not always a choice, right?
Yeah.
You're not always getting the help you need to get the sleep you need.
Mhm.
That's a whole nother topic.
Mhm.
um, but as we form community, we can start to be each other's village. We can start to support each other so that we can have our needs met. But making sure that our basic needs are met. Another way that I say to people is, like, think about the fact that scent is our strongest connection to memory and emotion,
Mhm.
right? And when I say that, people are like, oh, I don't, maybe I understand what you mean, maybe I don't. But then I say, remember your grandmother's house. How's your grandmother's house smell?
And they immediately, yeah.
They immediately know exactly what I mean, because not only does it bring back a scent memory, but it brings back an emotional memory. Good,
Mhm.
bad, indifferent, whatever. It's never indifferent, but it's
Yeah.
good, bad, somewhere in the middle. You remember your grandmother's house and you have a specific scent memory and a specific emotion attached to it. And we can recall and we can craft the world around us using scent to trigger specific emotions. using scent. Like if you look at certain architecture, my background is in interior design. In the Middle East, back in the day, they used to create bricks with rose water in
Yeah.
the mortar. And so
Mhm.
that as the day heats up, this scent of rose permeates the inside of a home. And it is one of the most beautiful things I have ever discovered in architecture. When I read that, I was like, ooh, I had chills all over my body, because then
Mhm.
every time you're entering your own home, right? Or any building, you have this beautiful scent memory that is created in that environment, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. And then also knowing that that we spend about 2/3 of our life inside of our home, right?
Yeah.
And so our home becomes the stage from which we are telling the story of our life. So setting that stage, getting just a little bit more intentional about it, right? In whatever ways we can. I'm not talking about doing more, right? By getting curious, by getting intentional, we start to be able to, like you were saying, your life was full of things that it was filled but none of it was bringing you joy necessarily. Maybe some
Yeah.
of it was, but most of it was not.
Mhm.
When we start to get intentional, we start to release that which is no longer serving us. And we make a hell of a lot of room in our life for
Yep.
exploration and intention, right? And that's where we can create time to explore what's possible and start being able to clear out the clutter and let go of the things that aren't serving us and be able to give them a coat of paint or sell them and get something else that really fulfills our true desires. Whatever it is, we start to get more intentional about what's surrounding us and the message it's sending us about ourselves.
It's so interesting to me because I kind of started doing that, like this is
Yeah.
filled to the brim too much around
Yeah.
2018. 2019, I started to make some shifts, but my life was still so busy.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And my life, unlike most people, my life didn't slow down. I had two kids to homeschool at home. My business did not shut down. We did not get any days
Mhm.
off.
Mhm.
My business was in crisis and I had to figure out how to keep people
Yep.
employed and,
Yep.
and so with my
Yep.
sister and all that, and my husband was stuck at home. So, and he has his own
Yep.
business. So he had a whole slew of
It's a
problems as
lot.
well. But what I saw in friends and actually what happened to me was my life actually came to the point where it was so like there was never any time alone
Yeah. Breaking
that
point.
I started creating time alone by getting up earlier. And I would encourage anybody, you don't have to get up earlier, but to spend an hour alone every
By
day.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, because it quiets the noise so
Mhm.
much. And
Mhm.
that's when I
Mhm.
started journaling and meditating. And that's
Yeah.
when these things started presenting themselves, right? Like coming up. And
Yeah.
I think that happened
Yeah.
to a lot of people. A lot of people look at the time of COVID and they see a lot of the sadness around it. And there was a tremendous amount of sadness. But
Yeah.
if you ever wanted to have faith in human ingenuity,
Yeah.
look at COVID
Yeah.
and people found a way. They found a way. The basic need to connect never goes away, right?
No.
Like people
No.
need to connect. So they
Mhm.
found a way to do that. But what also COVID gave them was time.
Mm.
And suddenly people wanted to bake and art. And they figured out, and this bartender figured out, oh, I can design these beautiful recipes and sell them online and
Mm.
not go. So is it any kind of shock that now we're in a labor crisis or
Yeah.
the labor market has shifted so much? And it hasn't, it's because people were given that
Yeah.
time,
Well, people
right?
were given time to discover what actually makes them happy, what actually brings them joy, what actually sparks fulfillment in them, rather than their labor, their expertise being exploited by someone else in ways that weren't actually being properly valued and
Yeah.
honored. Their intelligence, their creativity wasn't being honored. It was being disrespected in
Mm,
many, 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 many workplaces. In an effort to keep people in line, you have to disrespect them and dehumanize them. And so many people reacted so viscerally to that because everything else in their life felt like it was falling apart. For their boss to be disrespectful about that was absolutely unallowable. And they
yeah.
knew it in their bones. And so finding things that sparked their joy was absolutely necessary because all the things that had previously distracted them from that disrespect were gone,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Going out for drinks with friends after work so they could complain about their boss, that was gone
Yeah.
in an instant. And it felt like quite permanently because we,
Mhm.
for a long time, were like, this may never end. Or at least it felt that way. And
Mhm.
so I think that's I had actually started group coaching around the principles of life design about a year before the pandemic shut down.
Mhm.
But during the pandemic shutdown is when I really made that shift towards not just being an interior designer, but being a life designer and taking those principles I had used with my interior design clients. Because this is where I formed all of this, was working with my interior design clients. And they started telling me, hey, I'm telling everybody that you're my interior designer and you're my life coach. And I was like, you are? Okay, okay, that makes sense, right? And they gave me the permission and empowered me to like move forward with this message. That's when I got clear on it as well, was during the pandemic shutdown.
So, okay, so there's so many ways that I could take into
Yeah,
this. I want to come back to the employee question because
yeah,
you have a very unique way of hiring employees and
yeah.
dealing and building a culture. So I'm going to come circle back to that.
Sure.
But before I do that, I wanted to touch a little bit about, you talk about this getting in touch with yourself and all that, but it requires a certain amount of vulnerability, right?
Oh, a lot.
A lot. So talk to me. I think a lot of people are very scared of it. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
scary. It's
it
so
is.
scary. So I guess I wanted to hear your input on, how did you summon the courage to be that vulnerable? What
Yeah,
was it that happened for you?
yeah. I think I got to the place where I realized that there was going to be pain no matter what,
Mm. That
that we
famous
can't
quote,
escape. Yeah, we
right?
can't
Like give
escape
you
it.
bud.
Yeah,
Mm.
yes. Oh gosh, it's on my wall somewhere actually. Oh yeah, okay. And the day came when the risk to
Hmm.
remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom.
Yeah.
Anis nim. So I absolutely was certain that I was in pain no matter what,
Hmm.
and that I was going to risk it all on myself and the possibility of joy rather than spend the rest of my life denying myself the possibilities that I
Yeah.
didn't even know were there. I didn't even know what was possible, but I was committed to figuring it the heck out
Yeah.
because I couldn't keep going the way that I was going. It was, um, there's a poem that I used to love called George Gray by Edgar Lee Masters. Um, and it talks about a ship um, longing for the sea and yet afraid,
Yeah.
right? And that's what my whole life felt like. I had been longing for the sea. I was built for the sea. I was built to explore. And yet I was afraid. And what I came to realize is that fear, we've been taught to fear fear.
Yeah.
We're actually afraid of fear. We're not really afraid of hardly anything else. We're really just afraid of fear. And because that fear of fear has been used to manipulate us to keep us in line. But what the way that I look at fear now, and perhaps this is what courage really is that fear is expansion. Fear is the signaling that I'm growing outside of the parameters I've known before. Fear is exploration. Fear is growth. Fear is really something to be excited when I feel it, yes, it doesn't always feel good, and sometimes I still have a reaction of getting afraid of fear, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes I still have that, but most of the time when I feel that fear come up, I'm like, okay, okay, something
Yeah.
new is happening here and there's possibility here, right? There's possibility here. I don't know what's going to happen, and yes, that's scary, and yes, it's exceptionally vulnerable,
Yeah.
but there's something possible on the other side of this, and I'm willing to move through the fear, to feel the fear and keep going anyway. That's where the courage comes from, is to redefine what fear is.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Um, yeah, fear is very interesting to me. It
Yeah.
it really is. Because people often say they're always tell me you're so brave, and I'm like, I'm actually really not.
No, I'm
Like
scared
I'm
all the time.
afraid. Yeah, I'm scared all the time.
I have no
Like
idea what I'm
literally.
doing and I'm
No.
afraid all the time.
Yeah. I'm literally like I'm hosting a party tonight, and I'm like I woke up 3 days ago terrified. I'm like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
terrified. And I'm like,
It's
this is ridiculous. Like
going to be brilliant, though. It's going
it's
to be
gonna be
brilliant.
fine. Like, I'm like, what's the biggest thing that could happen? But
Yeah.
again, I think it's just being recognizing that fear. So I appreciate that. So I want to circle back a little bit about the
Yeah.
employees. As an employer myself, who really tries to honor the space that
Yeah.
people are in, et cetera. And you have this push and pull, right? Like you have a
Yeah.
business to run,
Yeah.
And you're relying on these people to come and do their jobs, and sometimes it's just not possible for them, like, for personal reasons, and you understand that, and you wanna be there, but you also have a business to run.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about the culture that you're building in your
Yeah.
own company, and what are the steps you're taking to honor the people that work for you?
I think the backbone of everything is communication.
Mhm.
And communication isn't a one-time thing. Communication is a constant. It's how
Yeah.
we actually communicate. It's how we actually develop relationships. Because as we grow and we learn, new boundaries are set, things are discovered, things are better understood. As we grow and we learn, boundaries shift and move.
Mhm.
Some boundaries never move, but other boundaries shift and move. They might get closer in, they might move further out this way and closer in other places. Communication has to be a constant. We must talk about what is our intention. What is my intention as the employer? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? How is it that I see your role in that? And then
Mhm.
how is it that you see your role in that as the person being
Mhm.
employed? What's possible? I have regular check-ins with the people who work for me. We set regular check-ins where they give me feedback.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And I'm going to caution anybody who's looking to just implement that, right?
Yeah,
Because you
you
are in
need
a
to know
position
your
of power.
stuff.
Correct. You are in a position of power. You cannot go to somebody who is employed by you and just ask them for candid feedback. Number one, having never done that before. Number two, not having established any relationship of trust and
Mhm.
understanding equity and equality in the conversation,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And that must be established. Culture starts with one. So you must establish yourself as someone who is trustworthy,
Mhm.
respectful, responsible, and creates respectful space and holds themselves accountable before
Mhm.
the people around you will be safe to do so,
Yeah.
right? Will be safe to do so and will also know themselves to be safe to do so. And it is not for you to decide when they trust you or when they should trust you. It is for them to decide. And that must
Mhm.
be honored and respected. But because I have created this culture intentionally from the beginning, I'm able to say, hey, I would really like some feedback here. And it's
Yeah.
not just every three, it's like sometimes at the end of a project, I'm like, hey, I felt a little chaotic during this project or when we were working on this thing. How did that feel for you?
Yeah.
What how did that feel for you? What did that do to you? I want to understand, and then I want to understand how I can be held accountable for not going there before. I'm also neurodivergent. So
Okay.
I have to understand, and I let everybody who works for me know, right? Some things I do are because I'm experiencing social anxiety. So I might need to express in the moment, hey, this is too much for me now. I need to take a breath. I'm going to take a lap around and then I'm going to come back, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe we need to hit pause on this and I need to come back in an hour. Um, but having things in place ahead of time, um, where everyone's created a lot of safety, psychological safety and respectful space allows us to have these conversations in a way that we're honoring one another because at any given moment, any one of us could be triggered, not just
Yeah.
me, them. So them being able to say, hey, I'm actually really triggered in this, and this is what's coming up for me because of how this was said, or because this wasn't held accountable, or whatever it is. And then also knowing that we must as individuals go back and clean it up,
Yeah.
right? When we say things, because we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. So when I
Mhm.
say something and I recognize that it hasn't landed the way that I intended, impact is different than intention. And
Yeah.
I have to speak to the impact of my words. I am responsible. I hold myself responsible for the impact of my words and going and continuing to communicate with someone until my intention is actually met in that communication. Right.
Yeah.
That's the level of responsibility I hold myself to. And I gained a lot of this insight. I studied corporate cultures, um, read a lot of books by a lot of founders, by ones that I would never mimic, and then ones that I really, really wanted to, right?
Yep.
That books by founders of all different types, like Danny Meyer. I read his book, I think it's called Setting the Table, is a
Mhm.
restaurant owner, very famous restaurant owner, very intentionally creates culture. I read um, uh, Creativity Inc. by Ed
Mhm.
Catmull about Pixar and their culture, and lots of dozens of other books. And I started pulling out the things that really felt like, oh, I want this
Mhm.
I want this to be my culture. So then that means I've got to implement this. This is the level of accountability I'm going to have to hold myself to in order
Mm-hmm.
to create this culture, right? It wasn't about what I expected of other people. It
Yeah.
was about what I knew I had to create myself and be responsible for so I could empower others to do the same.
Yeah.
Because
It's
we're the only one we can actually do anything about.
yeah, that's true. No, and like there's a difference between like agreement and expectation. I think
Yeah,
that's sometimes where employers fall. They have an expectation of the job, but they never actually came to an agreement
correct. They did not
with the
actually,
person.
right.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's super and I've experienced that myself, like where I have an expectation job and then I'm disappointed in this employee and then I'm like, well, did I actually really
Right.
talk to them about it? You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Actually
Like in
fully
a
express it. Yeah.
fully express it. So it's challenging. And
It is.
I'm with you. Like if you're not up to the task as the employer, if you're not capable of receiving that feedback and not reacting
Yeah.
negatively,
Don't do it.
don't do it. Like, just have a traditional workplace and because it's worse. It's worse if you try to do it and then you end up violating that trust. That's
Well,
actually
right.
worse.
It's way worse because then you violated people's consent. Like we enter into
Mhm.
relationships through informed consent, right? And if we're not being true to ourselves, right? So if you haven't done the self work to be able to take criticism and be able to be held accountable, which I think is much harder for men because they're not raised with consistent accountability.
Mhm.
It's not a knock against them. It's just reality. It's just reality. Um, you can't just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to do this. No, you have to do the self work, and it doesn't just take 5 minutes. It takes like 5 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
holding yourself accountable out loud to your people because they're seeing what you don't want them to see. Everybody
Yeah.
sees what you don't want them to see, and so holding yourself accountable is a huge part of that. That's where the vulnerability comes in and saying, hey, I messed up here. I'm going to clean
Yep.
it up. I'm going to take accountability for this.
And it's really hard in like very stressful, time-driven
Mhm.
environments. And I'll
Yes.
say that our culture does not support this kind of corporate environment. Like I'll give you an example during the
Yeah.
pandemic. Like people were understanding about limitations that we had to put in
Yeah.
to a point,
To a point, of
to a
course.
point. And then they were just like, not my employees, but my customers were just
Yeah.
like, well, you guys are open and you should be able to do this and you should be able to do that. And I'm just like,
Your shoulds are not my responsibility.
well, yeah, but I mean, you're in the customer facing
Of
environment, right?
course. Of
So,
course.
it was very difficult sometimes because it was like, well, I'm trying to manage an employee who,
Yeah.
let's say, has a health limitation and they're
Yeah.
not able to come into work now, or they have to work in a very specific
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to give them that because that's the humane thing to do.
Yeah.
But I'm also now have a customer,
Yeah.
I'm short staffed now. And I
Yeah.
have a customer who, we
I had to
have
take on a
this.
lot. Yeah. I had to take on a lot and do a lot in person myself because I,
Yeah.
I still work with clients as an interior designer, right? So they work with me doing life design. And then a natural outgrowth of that work is often them hiring me to help
Coach.
to help craft their environment, their physical
Mhm.
environment, right? So I do workshops. I do some one-on-one. One-on-one coaching isn't my jam though. It's not. Mostly I work with people through workshops, or if they've hired me as an interior designer, we kind of do this life design work
Mhm.
first, and then I do interior design work with them. So I was still having to meet like contractors out on client sites and things, but my assistant designer at the time, neither were comfortable going out in person. And so
Yeah.
I was doing all of the in person everything, right?
Yeah.
All of it myself. And then so our roles had to shift,
Yep.
right? Our roles had to shift. And I think that's also where it comes in is the flexibility and understanding, okay, my role has to shift. So then yours is going to have to shift. And let's talk about how they both can shift so that we're both comfortable and both of our needs are being met. But that you're also, contributing. So it's like there's a fluidity, just like in a marriage, right? When
Yeah.
kids are had, all of a sudden, maybe maybe you as the birther of the
Mhm.
children, you're now the primary caregiver of the nursing and all of those things.
Mhm.
That child's relying on you, right? So the other person in the relationship then might have to pick up more of the household chores because there's another person to care for now. It's
Yeah.
not just the two of you. And so there's a give and a take that happens and a shifting of roles. It's the same thing in every single relationship. It all could be equated to dating and marriage.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, like some of our employees are, there have been times when we've literally sat down with employees, said, "We love you, we absolutely love you, but this isn't your place in the
No,
sense that,
yeah,
you should be doing so much more, and we're
yeah,
going to support you until
yeah,
we can transition you out into a
yeah,
better opportunity,"
yeah.
which is not with us. Which let me
Right.
tell you, that's the hardest thing
Oh,
as
it's
an
hard, but
employee.
I've had to do it multiple times where I'm just like, "Hey, I think you
Yeah,
should take this." Well, and my employees come to me and they'll say, "Hey, there's somebody who reached out about an opportunity and I'd love to talk to you about it." And I'm like, "Yeah, let's talk about it."
yeah,
And they'll talk through it, and I know them. I've gotten to know them, right, through the years of them working for me. And so that's why they're coming to me as a mentor, and they know that they're safe to do so. And their job with me is not in jeopardy in any way, shape, or form. That's not even part of the conversation. It's not even a thought process in my head.
mhm,
And there's many times where I've been like, "That's a really good opportunity for you. I think you should take it.
yeah,
I think you should take it. Is that how you feel?" Like, it feels like that's what you want to say, and I think that's what you should do, because
yeah,
that's an incredible opportunity. And I have, while people are working for me, talked to their future boss.
yeah. Oh man,
Right? Like,
yeah.
and had conversations of what are their strengths, what are the things that might really align with them,
Mhm.
if they've given me permission to do that, to talk to their future boss in that way, right? There has to be permission there, right? There has to
Mhm.
be permission in every conversation had,
Yeah.
right? That's the other thing. There always has to be permission. So yeah, absolutely. I've absolutely, when someone was working for me and it felt like they wanted to do something, I've absolutely sent them job opportunities that I've noticed, right? That
Yeah.
a recruiter might have reached out to me on LinkedIn and been like, "Hey, blah, blah." And I'm like, I own my own company. I'm not doing that. But hey,
Yeah.
this would be great for you, right?
Yeah.
I think you should do this, right? And I can't afford to pay you that just yet.
Yeah.
I think you should take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now I get to ask you my evergreen question, which I asked
Yeah.
to guest, and
Mhm.
it is, what is a weird habit or ritual you have that makes your life more joyful?
Oh gosh. Okay, yes. I'm so excited to share this. Okay. But I want to preface it with the bottom of my shower is textured and it's absolutely slip proof. That's going to
Okay.
make sense in 1 second. Shower dancing. Shower dancing is my favorite thing, like maybe my favorite thing in the whole world. I
Okay.
love to just put on an incredible song and just move my body because no one's watching
Yeah.
when I'm in the shower, and just sing and dance and just let all the things move through my body. Let my body feel what it needs to feel, release what it needs to release. Because dance has, especially when you look at indigenous tribes and you look at indigenous peoples,
Mhm.
dance has been a way that they collectively and individually move through trauma,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And it is absolutely an incredible practice to let your body feel what it needs to feel and then let it move out.
Yeah.
And that connection to the ground, the connection to our body, the connection, it just, Martha Graham said, the body says what words cannot. And it
Yeah.
is 100% true. There's an entire language in the way that we move our body. And so shower dancing is my favorite thing.
I love it. Jen, Shayna, it was a pleasure having you.
Yeah.
If
Thank you.
any, you're very welcome. If anybody in the audience would like to hear more from Shayna or more about life design, visit her company's website at consensuate.world or find them on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. All links in the show notes below. As always, I'd love to hear from you about this episode. What does designing your life look like for you? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Farrah Haidar. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farrah@farrahhaidar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon. Till then, chase your happy.